The alley reeked of damp asphalt and regret, but Javier ran anyway, his sneakers slapping against the pavement as sirens screamed behind him. He wasn't a criminal. Not really, but the weight of Officer Ethan Caldwell's voice calling him one still burned. Tonight, it wasn't just the law chasing him. It was the man who'd already judged him guilty without a trial. Javier darted through Chicago's South Side, his breath ragged, his heart pounding louder than the police radios crackling in the distance. He'd swiped a single bottle of whiskey from a corner store, stupid, desperate, but not a felony worth this manhunt. The real crime was being born into a life where every choice felt like a trap. At 25, Javier Torres had learned to survive by bending rules, not breaking them, but guys like Officer Caldwell didn't care about the difference. To them, Javier was just another brown kid from the wrong neighborhood, a walking stereotype with a rap sheet he didn't deserve. He ducked behind a dumpster, pressing his back against the cold metal, his pulse thundering in his ears. The beam of a flashlight swept past, and he caught a glimpse of Caldwell, tall, broad, all sharp angles and unyielding resolve. The cop's voice boomed, "Torres, you can't run forever." Javier clenched his fists, hating how that voice sent a shiver down his spine. Not just fear, but something else he refused to name. 6 months ago, their paths first crossed at a community outreach event, a forced attempt at bridging the gap between cops and locals. Javier had been there to support his sister, Marisol, who ran a youth art program. Ethan, in his starched uniform, had stood out like a sore thumb, all authoritative charm and piercing blue eyes. He tried to make small talk, offering Javier a handshake and a smile that felt too genuine for a cop. Javier had scoffed, brushing him off. "Save your hero act for someone who buys it," he'd muttered, walking away. But Ethan's gaze had lingered, steady and unreadable, like he saw something Javier didn't want seen. Now, hiding in this alley, Javier cursed that moment. He'd been reckless tonight, but it wasn't about the whiskey. It was about Marisol's hospital bills piling up, the eviction notice taped to their door, the way life kept kicking him down. Stealing was a means to an end, not a lifestyle. But Ethan wouldn't understand that. To him, Javier was just another case file. The flashlight beam swung closer, and Javier's stomach lurched. He bolted, weaving through the maze of back streets, his mind racing. If he could make it to the old warehouse by the river, he'd be safe. The place was a haven for strays like him, kids who'd learned to disappear when the law got too close. But as he rounded a corner, a strong hand grabbed his arm, yanking him back. He stumbled, crashing into a wall of muscle and authority. "Got you," Ethan growled, his grip iron tight. Javier thrashed, but Ethan pinned him against the brick wall, their faces inches apart. Up close, Ethan's eyes weren't just cold. They were conflicted, searching Javier's face like he was more than a suspect. "Why do you keep doing this?" Ethan asked, his voice low, almost pleading. "Doing what?" "Surviving." Javier spat, his chest heaving. "You wouldn't get it, Officer Perfect. You've never had a scrape by." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't let go. "You think I don't see you? I know about your sister, your mom's medical debt. I'm not the enemy here." Javier laughed, bitter and sharp. "You're the one with the badge, man. That makes you the enemy." For a moment, neither spoke. The city hummed around them, distant horns, the low thrum of a train. But in that alley, it was just them, locked in a standoff. Ethan's grip softened, his thumb brushing Javier's wrist, and Javier's breath hitched. It was a mistake, that touch, but it felt deliberate, like Ethan was crossing a line he'd been towing for months. "You don't know me," Javier whispered, his voice cracking. He wanted to hate Ethan, to see him as just another cog in a broken system. But the way Ethan looked at him, steady, almost tender, made it hard to hold on to that anger. "I want to," Ethan said, so quietly Javier almost missed it. Then, louder, "But you've got to stop running." Before Javier could respond, another cop's voice cut through the night, calling Ethan back. He released Javier, stepping away, his expression torn. "This isn't over," Ethan said, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. Javier stood there, heart racing, the ghost of Ethan's touch lingering on his skin. He hated how it felt, how it made him question everything. He wasn't supposed to feel anything for a cop, let alone one who'd called him a criminal. But as he slipped away in the night, one thought haunted him. Ethan Caldwell wasn't chasing him just to catch him. The next morning, Javier woke to Marisol shaking his shoulder. "You look like hell," she said, her dark eyes narrowing. At 19, she was sharper than most, her art the only thing keeping her sane while their mom fought cancer. "What did you do this time?" "Nothing," Javier lied, rubbing his face. The apartment was a mess, stacked bills, takeout containers, a couch that sagged under the weight of their worries. Marisol didn't buy his excuse, but she didn't push. She never did. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said instead, tossing him a protein bar. "Or worse, arrested by that hot cop you keep dodging." Javier choked on his water. "He's not hot. He's a jerk." "Uh-huh." Marisol smirked. "Keep telling yourself that." He ignored her, but the truth gnawed at him. Ethan wasn't just a cop. He was a puzzle Javier couldn't solve. Every encounter left him rattled, like Ethan saw through the walls he'd built. And that touch last night? It wasn't just restraint. It was something more, something Javier wasn't ready to face. By noon, Javier was back on the streets, delivering food on his bike to scrape together cash. Chicago's summer heat was brutal, sweat soaking his shirt as he pedaled through traffic. He was halfway through a delivery when he saw Ethan again, leaning against a patrol car outside a diner. Their eyes met, and Javier's stomach flipped. Ethan didn't move, didn't call out, just watched, like he was waiting for Javier to make the next move. Javier pedaled faster, but the memory of Ethan's voice, "I wanna," followed him. He didn't know what Ethan wanted, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running forever. Not from a law, and not from whatever this was. The diner's neon sign buzzed above Javier, casting a pink glow over his bike as he locked it to a pole. He told himself he was just grabbing a coffee, not looking for Ethan, but his eyes scanned the street anyway. Ethan's patrol car was gone, but the weight of his gaze from earlier lingered like a bruise. Inside, the diner was a time capsule. Checkered floors, vinyl booths, and the smell of burnt coffee. Javier slid into a corner booth, his hands fidgeting with a sugar packet. He hadn't slept much, replaying the alley, Ethan's touch, the way his voice had softened. It didn't make sense. Cops didn't care about guys like him. They arrested, they judged, they moved on. So why did Ethan keep showing up, looking at him like he was more than a rap sheet? The bell above the door jingled, and Javier's heart stuttered. Ethan walked in, out of uniform now, his navy hoodie and jeans making him look less like a cop and more like someone Javier could have met in another life. He spotted Javier and paused, then headed straight for his booth, sliding in across from him without asking. "You stalking me now?" Javier asked, aiming for sharp, but landing closer to nervous. Ethan's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You're the one who keeps showing up on my beat." Javier leaned back, crossing his arms. "Maybe you're just bad at your job." "Maybe." Ethan's eyes held his, steady and unyielding. "Or maybe you're not as good at hiding as you think." The waitress interrupted, plunking down a coffee pot. Ethan ordered a black coffee. Javier stuck with water. Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Javier wanted to bolt, but something about Ethan's presence, calm, deliberate, kept him rooted. "Why'd you let me go last night?" Javier finally asked, his voice low. Ethan stirred his coffee, his expression guarded. "Didn't feel right hauling you in for a bottle of whiskey. Not when I know you're not the real problem." Javier snorted. "Don't act like you know me." "I'm trying to," Ethan said, leaning forward. "But you make it hard, Javier. You're always running, always fighting. What are you so afraid of?" The question hit like a punch. Javier's jaw tightened, and he looked away, focusing on the chipped edge of the table. "You don't get to ask that. You're the one with the power here." Ethan's hand stilled on his mug. "You think I feel powerful?" "Half the time, I'm just trying to keep people like you from getting chewed up by the system. People like me? Javier's voice rose, drawing a glance from the waitress. You mean poor? Brown? Queer? Ethan flinched, but he didn't back down. I mean people who deserve better than the hand they've been dealt. Javier wanted to argue, to throw Ethan's words back in his face, but the sincerity in his voice stopped him. He hated how it made him feel seen, vulnerable, like Ethan was peeling back layers he'd spent years building. He stood abruptly, tossing a crumpled dollar on the table. Stay out of my life, Caldwell. He was halfway to the door when Ethan called after him. I can't do that. Javier froze, his hand on the door. He didn't turn around, but he felt Ethan's eyes on him, steady as ever. He pushed outside, the summer heat hitting him like a wave, and biked away, his mind a mess of anger and something softer he refused to name. That night, Javier helped Marisol at the community center, setting up easels for her art class. The kids were loud, their laughter a rare bright spot in his day. Marisol nudged him as they worked. You're distracted. Spill. Nothing to spill, Javier muttered, but her knowing look made him sigh. Just that cop. Ethan. He's everywhere. Marisol raised an eyebrow. Hot cop's got you rattled, huh? He's not. Javier stopped, exasperated. He's just messing with my head. Or maybe you're letting him, she said, softer now. You're not a kid anymore, Javi. You don't have to fight everyone who tries to get close. He didn't answer, focusing on the easels. But her words stuck, gnawing at him as he biked home later, the city lights blurring past. He hated how Ethan got under his skin, how every encounter left him questioning himself. He wasn't supposed to feel anything for a cop, especially not one who'd cuffed him once before, back when Javier had been caught tagging a wall at 17. Ethan hadn't been the one to arrest him then, but he'd been there, watching, his expression unreadable even then. The next day, Javier's delivery route took him past the precinct. He didn't mean to linger, but there was Ethan talking to another officer outside. Their eyes met, and Ethan broke off his conversation, heading toward him. Javier's grip tightened on his handlebars, ready to pedal away, but Ethan raised a hand, not commanding, but asking him to stay. We need to talk, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. Not here. Somewhere neutral. Why should I trust you? Javier asked, his heart racing. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because I'm not trying to lock you up, Javier. I'm trying to understand you. Javier's breath caught. He wanted to say no, to keep running, but something in Ethan's eyes, earnest, unguarded, made him nod. Fine. Tomorrow. The diner. 6. Ethan's face softened, almost relieved. I'll be there. As Javier biked away, his chest tight, he wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. He was supposed to hate Ethan, to see him as the enemy. But the more they collided, the harder it was to keep that wall up. And deep down, in a place he didn't want to admit existed, he wasn't sure he wanted to. The diner was quieter at 6, the evening crowd thinning out as Javier pushed through the door. Ethan was already there, in the same corner booth, his hoodie swapped for a gray t-shirt that hugged his shoulders. Javier slid in across from him, his stomach twisting. This wasn't a chase or a standoff. It was a choice, and that scared him more than any siren. You showed, Ethan said, his voice warm but cautious. Didn't have anything better to do, Javier lied, his fingers tapping the table. He'd spent the day second-guessing this, Marisol's words echoing in his head. You don't have to fight everyone. Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped. I owe you an apology. For calling you a criminal. For assuming I knew your story. Javier blinked, caught off guard. Cops didn't apologize. Not to guys like him. You were doing your job, he said, shrugging, but his voice lacked conviction. My job's not to judge, Ethan said. I got it wrong with you. I saw the file, the petty theft, the trespassing, and I thought I had you figured out. But I didn't. Javier's throat tightened. He wanted to brush it off, to keep the walls up, but Ethan's honesty was disarming. Why do you care? He asked, quieter now. I'm nobody to you. You're not nobody, Ethan said, his eyes intense. You're Javier Torres, who takes care of his sister, who works 2 jobs to keep the lights on, who's got more fight in him than half the people I know. Javier looked away, his chest aching. No one had ever said his name like that, like it meant something. He wanted to argue, to push Ethan away, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "You don't know what it's like. Growing up where I did, you're either invisible or a target. I learned to be neither." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "I grew up in a small town. Everyone knew I was gay by 15, and they made sure I felt it. I joined a force to prove I was more than their whispers, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just hiding behind a badge." Javier stared, the confession hitting him like a wave. Ethan, the alpha cop, had been an outsider too. It shifted something in Javier, made Ethan feel less like an enemy and more like someone who got it. They talked for hours, the diner emptying around them. Ethan shared stories of his rookie days, the pressure to be perfect, the nights he questioned if he was doing more harm than good. Javier admitted things he hadn't told anyone. How he'd come out to his mom at 16, how her quiet acceptance had been his anchor, how losing her to cancer felt like losing his compass. By the time they left, the air between them felt different, lighter, but charged, like the moment before a storm. Outside, under the streetlights, Ethan hesitated. "Can I see you again? Not like this. Not as a cop." Javier's heart raced. He should say no, keep it simple, but his mouth betrayed him. "Yeah, okay." Over the next few weeks, they met at the diner, then a park, then a quiet bar on the edge of town. Each time, Javier felt the walls he'd built crumbling. Ethan wasn't just a cop. He was funny, stubborn, and way too good at listening. He remembered the little things, like how Javier took his coffee or the names of Marisol's favorite artists. And every time their hands brushed or their eyes lingered too long, Javier felt a pull he couldn't ignore. But it wasn't easy. Javier's world didn't trust cops, and Ethan's world didn't trust guys like Javier. One night, at the bar, a group of Ethan's colleagues spotted them. Their looks, sharp, judgmental, made Javier's skin crawl. He pulled away, his old instincts kicking in. "This was a mistake," he muttered, standing to leave. Ethan grabbed his hand, gentle but firm. "Don't run. Not from this." Javier's pulse pounded, but he stayed, letting Ethan's touch ground him. They didn't talk about it, but the moment felt like a promise, one neither was sure they could keep. By late summer, Javier was spending more time with Ethan than he'd ever admit to Marisol, who teased him mercilessly. They weren't dating, not officially, but the late-night talks, the shared laughs, the way Ethan's hand lingered on his shoulder, it was more than Javier had ever let himself want. But doubt lingered. Ethan was still a cop, still part of a system that had never been kind to Javier. And Javier was still a guy with a past, one misstep away from trouble. One evening, as they walked along the lakefront, Ethan stopped, his face serious. "I need to tell you something. I put in for a transfer. Desk job, community liaison. Less street. More talking to people like your sister, helping where it counts." Javier stared, stunned. "Why?" "Because I want to be someone you can trust," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Not just the guy with the badge." Javier's chest tightened, a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know how to answer, so he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, letting their shoulders brush, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. The lakefront breeze carried the scent of water and possibility, but Javier's mind was a storm. Ethan's words, "I want to be someone you can trust," echoed, challenging everything he thought he knew about himself, about cops, about what he could let himself want. They walked in silence, the city's skyline glittering across the water, each step pulling Javier closer to a line he wasn't sure he could cross. Back at his apartment, Marisol was waiting, her sketchbook open on the couch. "You're late," she said, not looking up. "Hot cop keeping you out past curfew." Javier rolled his eyes, dropping his keys on the counter. "His name's Ethan, and we're just talking." "Talking?" Marisol smirked, her pencil pausing. "You've got it bad, Javi. When's the wedding?" "Shut up," he muttered, but his face burned. He couldn't deny it anymore. Not to her, not to himself. Ethan was different, and that scared him more than any chase. He'd spent years keeping people at arm's length, but Ethan had slipped past his defenses, one quiet moment at a time. The next week, Ethan invited Javier to his place, a small apartment in Wicker Park with bookshelves crammed with history novels and a coffee maker that looked older than both of them. It was the first time Javier had seen Ethan's world, and it felt strangely normal. No badges, no uniforms, just a guy who liked his coffee strong and his music soft. They cooked dinner, tacos because Javier insisted, and laughed when Ethan burned the tortillas. It was easy, too easy, and that made Javier nervous. After dinner, they sat on Ethan's couch, a movie playing in the background neither was watching. Ethan's arm rested on the back of the couch, close enough that Javier could feel the warmth of it. "You're quiet tonight," Ethan said, his voice gentle. Javier shrugged, staring at the TV. "Just thinking. This, you and me, it's not simple." Ethan turned to face him, his expression serious. "I know. I'm a cop. You've got reasons not to trust me. But I'm here, Javier. I'm not going anywhere." Javier's throat tightened. He wanted to believe it, but the world didn't work that way. Not for him. What happens when your buddies at the precinct find out you're with someone like me? Or when I screw up again? Because I will. That's what I do. Ethan's hand found his, steady and warm. "You're not a screw-up. And my buddies? They don't get a say in this. You do." Javier looked at their joined hands, his heart pounding. He'd never let anyone this close. Not since his mom got sick. Not since he learned how much it hurt to lose someone. But Ethan's touch, his voice, his stubborn belief in him, it was too much and not enough all at once. Without thinking, Javier leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tentative at first, then desperate, like they'd both been holding back for too long. When they pulled apart, Ethan's eyes were bright, his voice rough. "I wanted to do that since the alley." Javier laughed, shaky but real. "You're crazy, you know that?" "Probably," Ethan said, grinning. "But I'm your kind of crazy." That night, Javier stayed, falling asleep to the sound of Ethan's breathing, the weight of his arm across Javier's chest. For the first time in years, he didn't dream of running. But the world outside Ethan's apartment wasn't as forgiving. A week later, Javier was biking through the loop when he heard sirens again. His stomach dropped, old instincts kicking in, but it wasn't about him this time. A protest had erupted downtown, something about police reform, and the streets were chaos. Javier pulled over, watching as cops in riot gear lined up, their faces blank behind shields. He scanned the crowd, looking for Ethan, his heart in his throat. He found him near a barricade, not in riot gear, but still in uniform, trying to calm a group of shouting protesters. Javier watched, torn between pride and fear. Ethan was good at this, de-escalating, listening, but the crowd didn't see that. To them, he was just another badge, another symbol of everything they hated. Javier wanted to run to him, to pull him out of there, but he stayed frozen, knowing he couldn't. When the protest dispersed, Ethan spotted Javier and jogged over, his face tense. "You okay?" he asked, scanning him for injuries. "Me? You're the one in the middle of that mess," Javier said, his voice sharp with worry. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's my job, Javi. I'm trying to make it better, but it's not always pretty." Javier nodded, but the unease lingered. He'd fallen for Ethan hard, but loving a cop meant living with this. The fear, the judgment, the constant pull between their worlds. As they walked away from the chaos, Ethan's hand brushed his, a small anchor in the storm. Javier held on, not sure if it was enough, but unwilling to let go. Fall settled over Chicago, the air crisp, the trees along the lakefront burning red and gold. Javier and Ethan were a couple now. No labels needed, just the quiet truth of late-night talks and shared mornings. But the city didn't care about their fragile happiness. It had its own rhythm, one that didn't pause for love stories. Javier was at the community center helping Marisol with a mural project when his phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed, and Javier's heart lifted until he answered. "Javi, I need you to stay calm. Ethan said, his voice tight. There's been an incident. I'm okay, but I'm at the hospital. The world tilted. Javier barely heard the rest. Something about a routine stop, a suspect with a knife, Ethan getting clipped in the arm. He was on his bike in seconds, pedaling through traffic, his mind screaming. He'd known this could happen, but knowing didn't prepare him for the fear clawing at his chest. At the hospital, Ethan was in a curtained-off bed, his arm bandaged, his face pale, but smiling when he saw Javier. "You look worse than I do," Ethan teased, but his voice was strained. Javier sank into the chair beside him, his hands shaking. "Don't joke, man. I thought—" He couldn't finish, the words too heavy. Ethan reached for his hand, wincing as he moved. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Javier wanted to believe him, but the hospital smells, antiseptic, fear, brought back memories of his mom, of losing her, of how fragile everything was. "You can't promise that," he said, his voice breaking. "Not with your job." Ethan's eyes softened. "I know it's scary, but I'm careful, Javi. I'm doing this for us, for people like us." Javier nodded, but the fear didn't leave. He stayed until Ethan was discharged, the two of them quiet as they rode back to Ethan's apartment. That night, Javier didn't sleep, his mind replaying every what-if. He loved Ethan, God, he loved him, but loving a cop felt like loving a storm, unpredictable and relentless. The next few weeks were tense. Ethan healed, but Javier couldn't shake the fear. He threw himself into work, picking up extra shifts, avoiding the deeper conversations Ethan tried to start. Marisol noticed, cornering him one evening. "You're pushing him away," she said, her voice sharp. "He's not the enemy, Javi. Stop treating him like one." "I'm not," Javier snapped, but the lie tasted bitter. He was scared, and fear made him build walls again, even with Ethan. One night, Ethan showed up at the community center, out of uniform, his expression determined. "We need to talk," he said, pulling Javier outside. The air was cold, their breaths visible under the streetlights. "I know you're scared," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I'm too. But I love you, Javier, and I'm not giving up on us, even if you're trying to." Javier's chest ached, the words hitting like a confession. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart." Ethan stepped closer, his hands framing Javier's face. "Then we'll build it stronger. Together." The kiss that followed was fierce, a promise sealed in the cold night air. Javier let himself believe, just for a moment, that they could make it work. But the world wasn't done testing them. A week later, Javier was leaving a delivery when he saw Ethan's patrol car, lights flashing, outside a convenience store. His stomach dropped as he biked closer, spotting Ethan wrestling a man to the ground, cuffs snapping into place. The scene was controlled, but the crowd wasn't. People shouting, phones recording, the air thick with anger. Javier froze, caught between wanting to help and knowing he couldn't. Ethan looked up, their eyes meeting across the chaos. And for a moment, Javier saw the weight Ethan carried. The badge, the scrutiny, the impossible balance of duty and humanity. He wanted to hate Ethan for choosing it, but all he felt was love, raw and overwhelming. As Ethan drove away, the suspect in the back seat, Javier stood there, his heart torn. He couldn't keep running from this, from Ethan, from what they could be, but he didn't know how to stop being afraid either. Winter crept into Chicago, blanketing the city in gray. Javier and Ethan were still together, but the cracks were showing. Every siren, every news report about police, every tense glance from Marisol reminded Javier of the tightrope they walked. He loved Ethan more than he'd ever thought possible, but love didn't erase the world they lived in. One evening, they were at Ethan's apartment cooking dinner when the TV blared a story about a police shooting in another city. Javier froze, the knife in his hand still as the reporter's words filled the room. Ethan turned it off, his face tight. "Let's not do this tonight," he said, but Javier couldn't let it go. Do you ever think about quitting? Javier asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Just walking away from it all? Ethan sighed, setting down his spatula. Every day. But I stay because I think I can make a difference. Because I want to be the kind of cop who'd have helped a kid like you, not judged you. Javier's throat tightened. He wanted to believe Ethan, but the fear was a constant shadow. And what if you can't? What if the system's too broken? Then I'll keep trying, Ethan said, his voice fierce. For you. For us. Javier didn't answer, but he let Ethan pull him close, their foreheads touching. It wasn't a solution, but it was enough for now. Christmas came, and Marisol insisted on a family dinner. Her, Javier, and Ethan. The apartment was cramped, the tree lopsided, but Marisol's laughter filled the space. Ethan fit in too easily, joking with Marisol, helping with dishes, his hand finding Javier's under the table. For a moment, Javier let himself imagine a future, holidays, a home, a life where they weren't defined by their pasts. But reality didn't wait long. In January, Ethan was called to a domestic disturbance call that went south fast. Javier got the text late at night. I'm okay, but it was rough. Can you come over? He biked to Ethan's place, finding him on the couch, still in uniform, his face drawn. A suspect had pulled a gun. Ethan had talked him down, but the fear in his eyes told Javier how close it had been. I can't keep doing this, Javier said, his voice breaking. Every time you walk out that door, I'm waiting for the call that you're gone. Ethan stood, pulling Javier into his arms. I'm here. I'm right here. But Javier pulled back, his eyes wet. For how long, Ethan? I love you, but I don't know if I can live like this. Ethan's face crumpled, but he nodded. I get it. I don't want to lose you, but I can't make you stay. They didn't talk after that, just held each other, the silence heavy with everything they couldn't say. Javier left at dawn, his heart a mess of love and fear. He didn't know how to choose between Ethan and the safety of his walls. For 2 weeks, they barely spoke. Javier threw himself into work, avoiding Ethan's texts, telling himself it was better this way. But every night, alone in his bed, he missed Ethan's warmth, his laugh, the way he made Javier feel like he was enough. Marisol called him out, blunt as ever. You're an idiot if you let him go. He's not perfect, but neither are you. Javier knew she was right, but fear was a hard habit to break. It wasn't until he saw Ethan at the community center, helping with a youth event, that something shifted. Ethan was in civilian clothes, laughing with the kids, his eyes lighting up when he saw Javier. It was the same look he'd given him in the alley, the diner, the lakefront, a look that said Javier was worth fighting for. Javier crossed the room, his heart pounding. I'm scared, he said, his voice low, but I don't want to lose you. Ethan's smile was soft, hopeful. Then don't. They kissed, right there in the community center, the kids cheering and Marisol smirking in the background. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start, a promise to try, to build something stronger than their fears. Spring brought new colors to Chicago, the lakefront blooming with possibility. Javier and Ethan were trying, really trying. Ethan's transfer to the community liaison role helped, keeping him off the streets and closer to the work he believed in. Javier took on fewer delivery shifts, focusing on helping Marisol with her art program, finding purpose in the kids' smiles. But the past didn't vanish. Javier still flinched at sirens, still felt the weight of his old life. Ethan still carried the badge, even if it meant something different now. They fought sometimes, about Ethan's long hours, Javier's stubborn pride, but they always found their way back, their love a stubborn thing, refusing to break. One evening, under a cherry blossom tree by the lake, Ethan pulled Javier close, his hands shaking. I've been thinking about this for a while, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver ring, nothing flashy, but it caught the light like a promise. Javier's breath caught. Ethan, what? Marry me, Ethan said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. I know it's not perfect, and I know you're scared, but I want this us for the rest of my life. Javier stared at the ring, his heart racing. He thought of the alley, the diner, the hospital, all the moments that had led them here. He thought of his mom, who'd taught him to love fiercely, and Marisol, who'd never let him give up. He thought of Ethan, the man who'd seen him, fought for him, loved him through the chaos. Yes, Javier whispered, his voice breaking. Yes. Ethan slipped the ring on his finger, and they kissed, the city humming around them, alive with possibility. It wasn't a fairy tale. There'd be more fights, more fears, more nights when the world felt too heavy. But they'd face it together, two men who'd found each other in the chaos, who'd chosen love over fear. That night, Javier lay awake in Ethan's arms, the ring cool against his skin. For the first time, he didn't dream of running. He dreamed of a future, messy, imperfect, but theirs. And as he drifted to sleep, he knew he'd never sleep without Ethan again, the man who'd once called him a criminal but now called him home.